The gun line always went quiet when Roland Teague started talking, because Roland Teague had earned the quiet. He was the kind of shooter other shooters drove across 3 states just to watch, and he knew it, wore it, walked with it. So when he stood at the head of the range that morning, with his thumb hooked in his belt, and let his eyes travel down the row of new arrivals until they stopped on the smallest one there, every man on the line stopped what he was doing and listened. Corporal Deverin. He said her name the way you read a form you already plan to throw away. You know how many rounds I've put downrange in 19 years? Nell Deverin didn't answer. She was cleaning her rifle, and her hands moved without her eyes, the way some people breathe in their sleep. More than you've had hot meals, Teague said, and a couple of the younger men laughed the way you laugh when the biggest dog in the yard makes a joke. I've got scouts built like door frames who couldn't hold my line for a week, and they ship me 120 pounds of... What exactly? What are you? He wasn't really asking. Go help the armorer count magazines. That's a job that fits your hands. She seated the bolt back into the receiver. It went home with a small, clean click. She didn't flush. She didn't argue. She didn't so much as tighten her jaw. She reached down, picked up a broken chunk of range concrete about the size of a baseball, and without once looking at where it was going, flipped it end over end across 40 feet of open ground straight into the scrap bucket. It dropped in clean. No rim. No rattle. A motion from some other life, easy as setting down a cup. Teague didn't see it. Nobody did. And that was the thing about Nell Deverin that the entire camp would spend the next 6 weeks failing to notice. The most dangerous thing about her had never once been the rifle. She did not yet know that in 6 weeks that rifle would run dry with open ground between her and the thing about to decide who lived and who didn't. She did not yet know that the only answer left would be a move no instructor had ever put in any manual, the one thing that had been hers long before the Corps ever got its hands on her. And she did not yet know that the man who'd just sent her off to count magazines would be the one screaming her name into a radio, praying she picked up. Before we go any further, if stories about the person everyone counted out, the one who stays quiet right up until quiet stops working, are the reason you're here, then do 2 quick things for me. Hit subscribe and drop the name of your city in the comments so I can see how far tonight's story travels, because this one has already reached farther than I ever thought it would. And stay to the very end, because when the man who blackballed her has 30 seconds left and no options at all, what he finally says into that radio and what she does after he says it is the part you'll still be turning over tomorrow. 6 weeks earlier, the camp sat on the ragged edge of a city the maps still called Haroun, though half of it had stopped being a city years before anyone in that camp arrived. It was a place of heat that pressed on you like a hand, of pale grit that got into your teeth and your rifle and your coffee, of streets that ran between 4-story shells with their fronts blown off, so you could see the wallpaper still hanging in somebody's 3rd-floor kitchen. Wind came off the flats in the afternoon and dragged the dust up the ruined faces of the buildings until the whole skyline looked like it was smoking. At night, the ruins ticked and settled as they cooled. It was the kind of country where a good shooter could see forever and still miss the one thing that mattered. Nell's file said she'd finished first out of 91 in her marksmanship class and held a group at 600 meters most instructors called a printing error. What the file didn't say, because there was no box on the form for it, was where the stillness came from. It didn't come from a grandfather, or a gun, or a war. It came from a wall. Back home, there'd been the flat brick side of a feed barn with a paint circle her father never got around to washing off, and a girl who threw at it because it was the one thing in her life that was completely hers. 10,000 throws, then 10,000 more. Not because anyone was watching, nobody was ever watching, but because the click of the thing hitting the center was the only quiet she could find. She built her whole philosophy alone, 3 words at a time, until it boiled down to a rule she still said before anything that mattered. You don't aim, you send. Overthink it, and you'd pull it wide every time. Pick the spot, commit the whole body, let go without flinching. That was everything. The Corps had taken the arm and never once asked about it. They'd handed her a rifle, seen what her hands did with it, and stopped looking there. Which was how a woman who could put a chunk of concrete into a bucket at 40 feet without her eyes ended up known around Haroun as the small one who counted magazines. Her first week on the range, she shot a group at 400 meters that a staff sergeant walked downrange twice to confirm, because he genuinely thought someone was messing with the targets. 3 rounds, 1 hole, ragged at the edges where the third had kissed the first 2. He came back up the line holding the target board out in front of him like it was hot. "Who's on point 6?" he said. Teague barely glanced. "That'll be the wind knocking her group tight by accident. Happens. Reset it." The staff sergeant looked at the board, then at Teague, then at Nell, who was already breaking her rifle down. He didn't say anything. But a man cleaning weapons 2 benches over, a local interpreter named Karam, who worked the camp and who most Marines walked past like he was furniture, watched her hands the whole time she stripped that rifle. He didn't know what a 400-meter group meant, but he'd spent his life watching men handle tools, and he knew the difference between a person using a thing and a person who had become part of it. He watched her fingers move, and he got quiet, the way you get quiet in a room where something is happening that nobody else has noticed yet. Later he said to her, in careful English, "You do that like it is easy." Nell didn't look up. "It's not easy," she said. "It's just quiet." He thought about that for a long time. The gatekeeping wasn't loud every day. Most days, it was just the line. When the scout sniper billets came open, Teague built the list, and her name wasn't on it. When the good Overwatch hides got assigned, they went to his people. Captain Elias Renner, who ran the company and could have moved a pen and put her name back on any of those lists, sat in the briefing where Teague read the assignments out, heard Deverin's name go unspoken again, and said nothing. He was not a cruel man. He was a busy one. Teague was a legend, and it is a very old story how the busy men let the legends decide who gets to matter. Silence from the man in charge is always permission, and everybody in that tent understood the permission, even the ones who wished they didn't. So she counted magazines, she ran ammunition, and she sat in the back of briefings and memorized the ground, every lane, every choke, every collapsed archway on the map of that broken city, because reading ground was free, and nobody could put her on a list to stop it. She logged the one drivable route through the eastern ruins, where a vehicle had to slow to a crawl and thread a gap under a fallen stone arch, because it was the only lane a wheeled thing could take. She didn't know yet why she'd need it. She just filed it, the way she filed everything, quiet and complete. The crisis did not knock. It arrived at 0430 on a Tuesday in the shape of a radio, going off in the operations tent loud enough to wake the whole line. A resupply patrol on the eastern edge of Harun had rolled into a coordinated ambush in the ruins. 3 vehicles, and the middle one was dead in the street with wounded inside and a heavy volume of fire coming off the upper floors on both sides of the lane. Cobra Element was pinned. They needed eyes and rifles on the high ground, and they needed them 10 minutes ago. And every high seat in that sector was a place a shooter had to reach alone and hold alone. Renner stood over the map, with the whole thing coming apart in front of him. The overwatch position that covered that lane was a rooftop. The doctrine said took a 2-man team, minimum to hold, and he did not have a 2-man team he could get there in time. Teague's best pair was already forward and cut off on the far side of the ambush. He had one shooter in camp who could reach that roof in the window they had and put rounds where they needed to go, and he had spent 6 weeks pretending she was a magazine counter. He keyed the net himself. "Deverin, ops tent. Now." She was there in 90 seconds, already kitted, because she was always already kitted. Renner looked at her and looked at the map, and there was a moment where the whole shape of the last 6 weeks sat in the tent with them. "That roof," he said, tapping it. "One shooter, no partner, no time. Doctrine says 2. He stopped. His jaw worked. "I should have had you on a line 6 weeks ago. That's on me. Can you hold it alone?" 2 words. "I can." "Then go. Cobra's dying out there." She was gone before he finished the sentence. Her first transmission came 4 minutes later, and it landed on the net like a different language than the one the camp had used about her for 6 weeks. Not the small one, not the magazine counter. A voice, flat and level, and completely without fear. "Base Deverin, I'm on the roof. I have the lane. I have both shooting floors. Tell Cobra to keep their heads down and hold. I'm working." Then she started working. The rooftop was a slab of cracked concrete with a knee-high parapet and a water tank on one corner that gave her shade and a rest for the rifle. Below and out to her right, the dead vehicle sat crossways in the lane, and the 2 buildings that flanked it were spitting fire from the 2nd and 3rd floors. Muzzle flashes winking in the dark window sockets like something blinking awake. She lay in behind the tank, settled the rifle onto the parapet, breathed out slow and long, and found her rule waiting for her where it always was. You don't aim. You send. The first man was leaning out a 3rd-floor window on the left, with a long gun, working the pinned patrol below him. She sent one round. The report of her rifle cracked flat across the ruins, a hard whip snap of sound that bounced twice off the far walls and came back thin. The window went empty. She was already moving to the next flash before the echo died. "Base Deverin, that's one." The count was hers to keep. There was no spotter to keep it for her, no second voice in her ear, and so she called it herself, each one, flat, into the net, because someone at base needed to know the lane was thinning, and because saying the numbers out loud kept her hands slow. 2 came from the 2nd floor across the lane, a man behind a light machine gun who'd been raking the street. When he paused to reload, she put a round through the window, and the gun went quiet. "That's 2. 3 and 4 came fast, a pair moving between rooms on the left, silhouetting themselves for half a second each, against a blown-out back wall. Snap. Snap. 4. For about 90 seconds, it looked like the thing the manuals promise and combat almost never delivers. One shooter, unmaking an ambush from above, clean and cold, while the pinned patrol below started to get their heads up. which is exactly when it stopped being clean. They found her. Somebody down the lane clocked the crack of her rifle and the direction it came from, and a machine gun that had been chewing on the street below swung up and started walking rounds across her rooftop. She heard it change register, the flat snapping of rifles giving way to the deep, ripping cough of a belt-fed heavy, a sound you feel in your sternum before your ears catch up. The first burst went high and wide, chewing the water tank behind her, and the second came lower. She had maybe a second and a half to understand that the wall she was lying behind was about to stop being a wall. Time did the thing it does. She saw the dust jump off the parapet in a line marching toward her, each impact throwing up a little gray puff. Closer, closer, the pattern of it as readable as a sentence. She heard the rounds cracking overhead, felt the concrete grit sting the side of her face, tasted dust and copper. She felt the heat of the morning and the cold sweat under her plate at the same time. Her mind did not scream. It calculated. The gun was firing in bursts. The gunner walked his fire left to right and reset. If she moved on his reset, in the half-second between bursts, she could make the far corner of the roof and put the water tank between them before the pattern reached her. She counted the burst. She felt the last round of it snap past. And in the pocket of silence, while he shifted his aim back left, she was up and moving low and fast across open roof, and the next burst tore through the space where she had been lying and blew the parapet apart in a cloud of pulverized stone. She came down hard behind the water tank on the far corner, rifle up, breathing through her teeth. The tank rang like a struck bell as rounds hammered into it, and the water inside it began to pour out through the holes in a warm rush across the roof. She let it. She found the gunner's window through her scope. Third floor, far building, the muzzle of the heavy still winking. He couldn't see her now. She could see the corner of his weapon and a sliver of him behind it. A sliver was enough. You don't aim, you send. She sent one. The heavy gun stopped mid-burst and did not start again. The silence after it was enormous. "Base, Deverin! That's 5. Guns down. Displacing." Down in the lane, the patrol was moving now, dragging their wounded out of the dead vehicle, but the fire hadn't stopped everywhere. A fresh group was pushing up the left-hand building to retake the high floors, and she could hear them through the broken structure, boots on rubble, a shout in a language she didn't need translated. 6 and 7 came as they crossed a gap where the building's front had fallen away. Snap, shift, snap. 7. 8 was a man who almost made it to cover. She caught him a stride short. 8. Every few rounds she called the number, and every few rounds the ammunition in her chest rig got a little lighter, and she started, without meaning to count that too. She keyed the net for the patrol's own frequency because she needed to know if the dead vehicle was clearing. "Cobra 2, Deverin. Status on your wounded." Nothing came back. She said it again, sharper. "Cobra 2, Deverin, do you copy?" The channel gave her nothing but the soft hiss of an open line, and in that hiss she heard every bad thing that silence can mean. 3 seconds? 4. The longest kind of quiet there is. The kind where you're already writing the letter in your head. Then a voice broke through it, ragged, out of breath. A young man's voice pushed high by pain and adrenaline. "Deverin, Cobra 2, we're moving. We've got 2 down. 1 bad, real bad. We're coming to you. We can't, the street's still hot." "Then I'll make it cold," she said. "Move on my mark." She put 4 fast rounds into the last 2 windows, still showing fire, watched them go dark, and keyed the net. "Street's yours. Go now. Go." And they came, low and stumbling out from behind the dead vehicle, 4 men carrying a 5th in a poncho litter, and she covered every meter of that street with the last of what she had, her count dropping in her head with every round. 12 left, 10, 8, until they made the base of her building and the door and the stairwell. And then boots were coming up toward her, and a man in a filthy uniform was crawling onto her roof, dragging the litter with 3 others. The man in the litter was a sergeant named Halloran, and he was not young, and that somehow made it worse. 44 years old, gray coming in at his temples, and he had been hit badly in the fighting, and had lost a lot, and he was fading in the way men fade when the body starts making decisions the mind hasn't agreed to yet. His people had a pressure dressing on the wound already, but it wasn't holding. And the youngest of them, the one whose voice had cracked on the radio, was pressing on it with both hands and shaking. Nell put her rifle down. The same hands that had held a target at 400 meters in the dark came off the weapon and went on to the dressing. Over the young man's, hard, finding the spot, leaning her whole weight into it the way you have to. "Higher," she told the kid. "There, both hands. Don't let up." She was not a medic. She had no hidden bag of tricks for this. She had bare competence, a steady weight, and a voice that did not shake, and in that moment, those 3 things were the whole world. Halloran's eyes found her face. He was gray, and going grayer, and he knew it. You could see that he knew it. "Hey," he said, and his voice was almost nothing. "Hey, straight answer. I don't want the nice one." He swallowed. "My girl's getting married in 3 weeks. I'm supposed to walk her down. Am I going to walk her down?" Everyone on that roof went still. It was the kind of question that has a right answer and a true answer, and they are not always the same, and every man there was afraid of what she'd say. Nell held his eyes and held the wound and did not blink. "You're going to walk her down," she said. "Not a hope. Not a maybe." She said it the way she'd say the sun was up. "You're going to hate the shoes. You're going to cry and lie about it. 3 weeks. I've got you." Halloran let out a breath that was half a laugh, and it seemed to cost him everything he had left. "Deal," he whispered. "Deal," she said. "Stay awake. Talk to me about the shoes." The casevac bird came in low and loud 11 minutes later, and she held that pressure the entire time, and she talked to him the whole way about a wedding and a pair of shoes he hadn't bought yet. And when they carried him off the roof, his eyes were still open, and his hand came up and caught her sleeve for a second before they took him. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. And that, for about 4 minutes, was the whole story. The ambush was broken, the patrol was out, the wounded were on the bird. Base came up on the net, told her good work, told her a relief element was inbound, and to sit tight. She sat with her back against the ruined parapet in the warm running water, rifle across her knees, and let herself breathe. 8 down, the lane clear. She thought it was over. It was not over. It was about to get worse than anything the morning had shown her. The first sign was the sound. Under the settling quiet came a low, grinding note from the east. An engine, a big one, working hard through rubble. Then the net exploded. It was Teague's voice, and she had never once heard it sound like that. His forward pair, the 2 scouts who'd been cut off on the far side, had been pushed back and were now pinned in a shell of a building at the collection point 300 meters east. The exact building where the last of the wounded were staged, waiting on a second bird, along with Teague himself, who'd pushed forward to coordinate the extraction and gotten caught in it. And coming up the eastern lane at them, the only lane a vehicle could take, was a technical, a battered pickup with a heavy machine gun bolted in the bed and a gunner standing behind it, rolling in to finish what the ambush started. When that gun reached the collection point, it would take the building apart, and everyone inside it, in under a minute. Nell was already up and moving to the east edge of her roof, and even as she moved, she was checking her chest rig, and even as she checked it, she already knew. She had displaced twice, covered a street clearance, and put down 8 men. She racked her bolt and thumbed the last of her ammunition, and got the number she'd been dreading for 10 minutes. Empty. 1 round left in the chamber, and then nothing. And a single fragmentation grenade she'd carried the whole deployment and never thrown. The technical came into view around the base of the ruins, and she got her eyes on it and read it the way she read everything, fast and complete. It was moving perhaps 25 kilometers an hour, forced slow by the broken ground, following the only lane it could, the lane she had logged in a briefing tent 6 weeks ago, the one that had to thread the gap under the fallen stone arch, where any vehicle had to nearly stop and crawl through a gap barely wider than itself. The gunner stood in the open bed behind his heavy gun, exposed from the waist up, swinging his muzzle toward the collection point building. 1 round in her chamber would not stop that truck, and would not drop that gunner before he opened up, and the moment she fired it, she'd have nothing. She had the highest, best angle on the whole battlefield, and she had almost nothing to shoot it with. That was when the net went quiet in a different way. And then Roland Teague's voice came onto it, and the whole thing changed. You have to understand what it cost him. This was a man who had built 19 years of identity on being the finest shooter in any room, who had looked at Nell Deverin and seen 120 pounds of nothing, who had sent her to count magazines in front of laughing men, and now he was on his belly in a shell of a building with a truck-mounted heavy gun about to erase him and everyone with him, and the only rifle in the world that could reach it belonged to the woman he'd spent 6 weeks erasing. The net hissed. He didn't key it. 2 full seconds passed, and everyone on the company frequency heard those 2 seconds, and every one of them knew what he was choking on. When he finally keyed it, his voice was stripped down to the bone. Deverin. A breath. Deverin, it's Teague. I've got 11 souls in this building. 3 of them can't walk, and a 50 rolling up the east lane that's going to kill every one of us in about 40 seconds. His voice cracked, and he shoved it back down. You're the only gun that can see it. I know what I'm asking. I'm asking you, please. The whole net heard the man beg. The whole net heard him say, please. And in the collection point building, and back at base and on that rooftop, everybody understood that something had just broken and could not be put back the way it was. Nell looked at the technical crawling toward the arch, and she looked at the 1 round in her chamber, and she did the math that no one else on that battlefield could have done, because no one else on that battlefield had spent 10,000 throws learning to read the exact speed of a moving thing and the exact moment it would be where she needed it. She keyed the net. Flat. 1 round. That's all I've got. It's not enough to stop the truck. A beat. But the truck has to slow to a crawl to get through the arch. It gets narrow there. It's the only way through. She was already low crawling to the parapet's edge, already gauging the distance to the choke, already feeling the old motion wake up in her shoulder, like something that had only been sleeping. When it hits that gap, it'll be doing walking pace for 3-4 seconds right below me. 40 meters. Open bed. Open gunner. She wrapped her hand around the grenade. I'm not going to shoot it. There was silence on the net. Deverin, say again your last, Renner said from base. I said, I'm not going to shoot it, she said. I'm going to throw. Back at base, a lieutenant actually laughed, one short disbelieving bark, because it was insane, because nobody throws a frag into the open bed of a moving truck at 40 meters from a rooftop under fire, because there is no school in the entire military that teaches that. Teague, lying in the rubble 300 meters away, heard her say it and closed his eyes, and he did not laugh, because 6 weeks ago he had watched her flip a chunk of concrete into a bucket at 40 feet without looking, and had been too busy being a legend to understand what he'd seen. The technical reached the arch. It slowed, exactly as she had known it would, its engine dropping to a low grind as the driver eased it into the gap, and the gunner up top braced a hand on the cab and swung his gun toward the collection point, and everything in the world narrowed down to a moving bed of steel 40 meters below, and to her left, and a single grenade in her right hand. She rose to one knee behind the shattered parapet, fully exposed, because there was no throwing that shot lying down. The instant she came up, a rifleman she hadn't spotted in the ruins across the lane opened up on her, and rounds began cracking off the concrete beside her, chips of it stinging her cheek and neck, and she felt the wind of one pass close enough to move her hair. She did not flinch. She could not flinch. Flinching pulls it wide every time. She pulled the pin. She felt it come free, cold and final. She let the spoon fly, heard the little metallic snap of it, and she counted. Because a grenade thrown to land is a grenade that gets picked up and thrown back, and a girl who'd thrown 10,000 times knew you had to make it arrive alive. 1, 2. The truck crawled through the gap. The gunner's bed slid into the place she'd chosen before it got there, the way you throw not to where the runner is, but to where the runner will be. Her whole body was one motion now, the same motion off that feed barn wall, the same release 10,000 times over, hips and shoulder, and the long, clean arc of her arm. You don't aim, you send. She sent it. The grenade left her hand in a high, flat arc, turning slow against the smoking sky, and for one endless second it hung there over the lane while rounds cracked past her and the truck crawled, and every soul on the net held their breath at the sound of a shot no one could see. It dropped, not on the road, not against the cab. It dropped clean over the side rail and into the open bed at the gunner's feet, 40 meters out and moving, threaded into a target the size of a bathtub on a truck doing walking pace, and it detonated exactly where and exactly when it had to. The technical shuddered to a dead stop in the mouth of the arch, its gun canting up and going silent, and it did not fire again. Nell dropped flat as the rifleman across the lane kept working her position. She got her rifle up, put the one round she had left through the window where his muzzle was flashing, and heard him stop. Then there was no more incoming at all. There was just the ticking of a ruined engine, and the wind dragging dust up the broken faces of the buildings, and, on the net, a silence so complete it had its own weight. She keyed the radio. Her voice didn't shake. "Base, Devrin. Vehicles down. Shooters down. I'm black on ammunition. 0 rounds, 0 grenades. Collection point is clear. Engagement complete." Engagement complete. 2 words, clinical and flat, laid over the top of the most impossible thing any of them had ever heard happen. And that contrast none of the men on that net ever forgot. For a while, Base didn't believe it, and it's worth saying that plainly. When the story came out of the men who'd been pinned inside, that the magazine counter had thrown a frag into a moving truck bed at 40 meters and killed a heavy gun with her arm, the reaction back at camp was not awe. It was the flat certainty that soldiers under stress exaggerate, that grenades don't work like that somebody had gotten it twisted in the noise. A gunnery sergeant, who hadn't been there, said out loud in the operations tent that it couldn't have happened that way, that she must have caught the fuel, or a lucky secondary, that people don't throw grenades into moving trucks. 3 things settled it, and none of them was her. The first was the drone. An ISR bird had been on station over the eastern lane the whole time, and its feed had recorded the entire sequence in cold, silent, unarguable overhead. The truck crawling into the arch, the small figure rising to one knee on the rooftop under fire, the pale streak of the grenade arcing across the gap and dropping into the bed, the flash. They played it in the operations tent, and the tent went quiet, the way the gun line used to go quiet for Teague. The second was the ground. When the site was cleared, the technical sat exactly in the mouth of the arch, with the damage contained inside the bed. No fuel strike, no lucky secondary. The plain physics of a grenade that had gone off where a grenade had been placed. And the third was the men who'd been in that building. 11 of them, separately, each telling the same account without having compared notes, right down to the 2 seconds Teague choked before he keyed the radio. When independent men who don't like each other all tell you the same impossible thing, and the machine overhead tells you the same thing, and the wreckage on the ground tells you the same thing, the disbelief runs out of places to stand. Somebody paced off the throw the next day, boot heel to boot heel, from the base of her building to the mouth of the arch. 41 meters. They stopped calling it a lie after that. The reckoning came 2 days later, in the same place it had started. Teague found her at the range, in the early morning, before the heat, when the light was still low and gray on the ruins. She was cleaning her rifle, hands moving without her eyes, the way she'd been doing the first time he ever bothered to insult her. He stood at the edge of the concrete for a long moment before he came any closer. A big man made suddenly unsure of the size of his own hands. "Corporal Deverin," he said, and this time her name didn't come out like a form he planned to throw away. It came out slow, like it hurt to lift. She looked up. Teague opened his mouth, and nothing came. He tried again. The words came in pieces, out of order, restarting. "I need to... There's not a..." He stopped and pressed the heel of his hand against his own sternum, like something was stuck there, and started over. "I've been shooting 19 years. I built my hole. Everything I am is being the best gun in the room. And I looked at you, and I decided there was nothing there. In front of my men. I decided it, and I made it true. Because I run the lists." His voice was going rough, and he was letting it. "You were on that roof alone because of me. Halloran's alive because of a woman I sent to count magazines. I'm alive because of her." He stopped and made himself hold her eyes, and it visibly took everything he had. The way holding pressure on a wound takes everything. "I was wrong about you, in a way I don't think I get to take back. I'm not asking you to. I just needed to stand here and say it to your face, where somebody could hear it, because I said the other thing to your face, where everybody could hear it. That's all. That's it." The apology cost him. You could see it costing him the whole way through, the biggest dog in the yard, laying down in the dust on purpose. He didn't recite the insults back. He didn't need to. What he owned was heavier than a list. Nell was quiet for a moment. Then she set the bolt into the receiver, and it went home with that same small, clean click. "We're good," she said. 2 words. That was all. and somehow it was the largest thing anyone had said in that whole conversation. Captain Renner made it official and short, the way the truly overdue things sometimes have to be, because a speech would have been about him. He put her name at the top of the Scout Sniper roster he'd let another man keep it off of, gave her the Eastern Overwatch sector as her own, and told her, in the operations tent with the drone footage still cued on the screen behind him, "You're not counting anything ever again unless it's targets. That's my word." Then he shook her hand, which he had never done, and that was the whole ceremony. And it was enough. Karam the interpreter found her that evening at the edge of the camp, watching the light go down red over the smoking ruins. He'd heard the whole thing by then. Everyone had. He stood next to her for a while, without speaking, the way she liked, and then he said, in his careful English, the plainest and truest thing anyone said about her that whole deployment. "The others," he said, "they were looking at your gun the whole time. All of them. 6 weeks." He shook his head slowly. Nobody looked at the hands. The hands were the thing. He was quiet a moment. "You brought a father home to his daughter, with the part of you they laughed at." She didn't answer that. She didn't have to. But something eased in her face, just slightly, and for one private moment, the only one she let herself have the whole story. She let a small, tired, real smile come and go, there and gone in the red light, seen by one man who had known to look. The final count, when they totaled the 2 operations, came to 31. 31 enemy fighters put down across the ambush, and the collection point by one shooter, working alone from the high ground. They wrote it up that way, 31, a whole clean number, and it sat in the record separate and apart from the thing that everyone actually talked about, which had no number at all, because you cannot put a number on a grenade thrown 41 meters into a moving truck bed by an arm nobody bothered to ask about. The number was the job. The throw was the story. Somebody in the tent, weeks later, still trying to square it, asked her how she'd known, and she could make that throw with no ammo and no training, and a rifleman shooting at her head. It was the closest anyone came to naming the theme of the whole thing out loud, and she answered it in dialogue, quiet, without ever calling it a philosophy. "They spent 6 weeks telling me what I wasn't," she said. "You can't argue with people like that. They're louder than you, and they run the lists." She looked at her hands. The only thing that ever shut it up was doing the thing. Skill's the one argument nobody can shout you down out of. So I kept the argument to myself, and I waited for the day it'd have to answer for itself. She shrugged, one shoulder, the throwing one. That day showed up. 3 weeks after that, on the far side of the world, a man named Halloran, with gray at his temples, and a hitch in his walk that would stay with him the rest of his life, stood in a rented suit at the back of a small church, hating the shoes exactly the way she'd promised. He took his daughter's arm and walked her down the aisle, and he cried and lied about it. And somewhere in the middle of it, he thought about a small woman leaning her whole weight into a wound on a broken rooftop, telling him it was a deal. And back at the camp on the edge of Haroun, in the gray early light, on the same slab of range concrete where Roland Teague had once told a laughing line of men that her hands were only good for counting, Nell Deverin walked out alone to shoot before the heat came up. She was in motion, and then she was still, the way she'd taught herself to be still against a feed barn wall a lifetime ago, breath long and slow, eyes level and empty of anything but the work. She settled behind the rifle. She found her rule waiting where it always was, and it didn't mean quite what it used to mean, because now the whole camp knew what she could send and where. You don't aim you send. Down the line, a man who had spent 19 years, certain he was the most dangerous person on any range he stood on, watched her from the doorway of the armory, and everything he'd been sure of about who mattered and who didn't, sat down quietly inside him and did not get up again. She breathed out, she sent it. The report cracked flat across the ruins and came back thin, and the target 300 meters out went down, and the smallest one on the line, the one nobody had looked at, held the empty morning steady in her level eyes, and, for the first time in a very long time, was exactly where she belonged.